Hi, my name is Rickard. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create this composite that you can see here. So this is about a half-an-hour composite, and in this I cover quite a bit. I cover guide layouts, the select subject, which is one of the new features of Adobe Photoshop 2019, quick selection, quick mask, select and mask, refining edges, the lasso tool, how to get the most out of that, free transform, masking, the pen tool, layer blending, color grading with gradient maps, how to create a custom brush, and also how to add film grain. So let's get started. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is go to Create New. We're going to choose Photo, default Photoshop size 5x7. We're going to change the orientation to Portrait and then hit Create. Next, I want to go to View, New Guide Layout, and I'm going to choose 4 columns, 4 rows with no gutter, with no width, no height, and no margins. So let's hit OK. All right, next we're going to go File, Place Embedded, and from our Assets folder, we're going to choose Jeffrey Steen. Let's go ahead and place that. And we're going to move that down. I'm going to hold Shift and move it down to right about there. So kind of if this, using this guide, I want this to be above the guide, this to be below the guide. So right about there. And this, I want to just cut out the sky here. So I'm going to go ahead and choose the quick selection tool, just paint this area here. And then holding down Option, I'm going to click on the mask. Now you'll see if I zoom in that we have a little line here. So let's zoom back out. And to zoom, I'm holding down Command and the spacebar. Now I'm going to Option click on the mask, and you can see the black line there. I'm going to go in the Gradient tool, make sure my foreground is black by hitting D and then X to switch those. And then make sure my gradient is on foreground to transparent. Let's hit OK. And then I'm just going to hold down Shift and then drag down just like that. There you go. And then we can Option click on the mask again so we can see our image. Next, we're going to go File, Place Embed. And we're going to choose this image here, Tyler, and I'm going to flip that horizontal. Essentially, I just want to use this part of the image. So let's go ahead and put it underneath here and then place that right about there. Good. And again, let's turn off this layer, and then I'm going to hit W for the quick selection tool and select the sky here. I'm going to zoom in and select this too. Good enough. And then let's hold down Option and click on the mask again. And let's Option click on that mask and do the same thing. Go G for gradient, put a gradient there. And in this case, I want to see which part here. So I just want to put the gradient between here and here. So I'm masking out this, but not affecting the water. Just like that. Good. Let's go back on our background. Click Place Embed. And this time we're going to use the Tobias image here. And that's going to be our sky. Let's zoom out. We're just going to place that right about there. Good. All right, next we're going to go File, Place Embed yet again. And I'm going to take the Michael Widener image here. Flip horizontal, and this, I primarily want to use this golden lining here. So let's make this bigger, and we're going to place it so that it's left of our center guide right there. So right about there. Good. And I'm going to put a mask on that. go on my gradient tool and just gradient out everything but this area here. So about like that. So I just want to use that edge right there. Good. All right, next we're going to do File, Open, and I'm going to choose the Chris Spiegel image. And here we're going to go on the Quick Selection tool and click on Select Subject. Now, if you don't have the latest version of Photoshop, you can do the same. You can use the Quick Selection tool to make your selection like this, but this Select Subject, which is a great addition, by the way, we're going to use that and just click on Select Subject, and that's going to do almost all the work for us. So there you go. We've now selected him. Now there are some issues with the selection, so what I'm going to do is click on Select and Mask, and then zoom in here, and using the Refine Edge brush, I'm going to paint around the hair here. And so you'll see two brushes here. Those are the two primary brushes you're going to use. The Quick Selection brush at the top either adds or subtracts from your primary selection, and then the Refine Edge is for doing hair and other things that you're not going to be able to go in and do manually. So there you go. And then let's go to the Add Selection. And it's Add Selection. If you hold down Option, it becomes minus selection. So let's go right here, just grab that part of the jacket there, grab this part of the lens here, and the part of the jeans here. And that looks quite good. And then also what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on Refine Smart Radius and just up that to about 3 pixels. And then I'm going to hit OK. All right, and then we're going to put a mask on there, not holding Option this time. And then if we Option click on the mask again, we can see where we need to fix it up. So you can see between his legs there, we have something showing. So let's go ahead and click on L for the lasso. And I'm going to select this area. Now when you're on the lasso tool, if you click and drag, you're making a selection. But the problem with that is if you bump your arm or what have you, you have to start the whole selection over again. So what I prefer to do is hold down Option, which turns your lasso into the polygonal lasso if you unclick your mouse. So generally when I use the lasso tool, I'm always holding down Option on the keyboard. And the advantage with that is you can click and drag like the normal lasso tool, but if you let go, you're not creating your selection, and you can then use it as the polygonal selection tool. So let's do that. There you go. And then I'm on the mask, and I'm going to fill with the foreground color, which is Option Delete. And let's clean up this spot right here as well. And right in between his arms here. Now we're going to make him quite small, so probably, fine details like this don't really matter. But in case you want to blow this up to poster size, you can. And there you go. All right, so that looks quite good. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to convert this to a smart object and then drag this into our other document there. Good. All right, I want this on top of these layers. And we're going to place him on this rock here. Now I also, because our sun is coming from here and the light is hitting him on the right side, I'm actually going to do Command T for free transform and then flip horizontal. All right, and then we're going to scale him down. We want him right below this guideline here and right about in the center, a little off to the right, so about there. And I want him sitting on top of these rocks here. I'm holding down Shift, but in the new version of Photoshop, holding down Shift has the opposite behavior from previous versions of Photoshop. Because I've been using Photoshop for 15 years, I really don't want to change that. So you can change that, and I will include a link in the description of how you can change that behavior. All right, so that looks good. All right, then next I'm going to do File Open again, and this time I'm going to get the Laura College image. And we're going to use Select Subject again. So let's go on the Quick Selection tool. So the Quick Selection tool is where you get the Select Subject there. I believe you can also get it here. Yeah, Select Subject. But if you want to do it without having to go into your top menu, simply hit W for the Quick Selection, and then you'll see it there. So let's click on that. All right, it didn't do as good a job as it did on the man, but we're going to go ahead and fix that. So now let's hit Q. Q puts you into a quick mask where you can paint with black and white or fill with black and white to adjust your selection. All right, so let's go in the lasso tool. Actually, on this, because this is pretty much the largest element in our composite, I'm going to use the pen tool where I have more control, and I'm going to use that to make the selection. And to use the pen tool, simply click and drag. When you drag, you create these handles that determine the curve of your line. This takes a bit of getting used to. And I highly recommend that you take some of my professional or premium courses on Nuclei, where I go in much further detail in terms of how to use the pen tool for selection. And I'll include a link for that as well. All right, now here you can see I need to make a hole in the selection. You can simply continue making your path, but make sure this up here is on Exclude Overlapping Shapes. So there you go. Now let's go right mouse click and make selection. I'm going to add a slight feather there. Let's do 0.1. Whatever. Make selection. Okay. Strange. Oh, okay. What happened? Okay. So we need to make sure, let's go on A for the arrow tool. Let's make sure we have both of those paths selected. Now we're going to go make selection, and there you go. All right, so now what I'm going to do is fill with black, and that'll get rid of anything that I don't want in the selection. Then I'm going to invert, go ahead and select my brush, and make sure I'm just on a, I mean, you can be on any of the general brushes really. And what we're going to do, now I can adjust the brush holding Control and Option and sliding left and right. And I just want to paint with white the inside of these areas here. And there you go, we have a nice selection there. I also don't like the shape of this, so I'm going to go ahead and use the pen tool again to adjust that. Now, it's a bit hard for me to see what the original looked like. So if you want to change the opacity of that mask, which is usually pink, just go to your channels, double click on the quick mask, and there you can change the color of your mask and also the opacity. So in this case, I'm going to change the opacity to 10. I do want it on a color that's going to contrast with the background, and our background is kind of a brownish green, so I don't want to use anything in this range. So I'm going to use kind of a bluish color, Let's hit OK. And there you can see 10%. I mean, you can hardly see the mask. So maybe 20%. There you go. You can see it a bit better. What we're going to do is just here, let's make a nicer edge shape here. And I want to make sure I dig into the deer, not go outside of it, so that where we have our edge there isn't showing the background. I'm going to clean up that little bump there as well. So just to about there should do the trick. And let's close that path and make selection. And now I can make this back to 50%. And I want to fill that with black. So I'm going to hit X to switch my default colors there. And then Shift Command I to invert my selection. Go in the brush tool, switch those back, and just paint that edge. Good. Alright, that looks pretty nice. Now I'm going to hit Q to get out of my quick mask, go on any of the selection tools, and click Select and Mask. And in here, what I want to do is go on the Refine Edge and just paint in these lashes here. Now, this not going to make much of a difference, but even if we get a little bit, it'll add to the realism. And that looks quite good. So let's hit, oh, and also I'm going to do a little bit of refine radius there. And let's bring that to 3 pixels, hit OK. And let's add a mask and convert that to a smart object. And let's drag that in here. And this I want below everything but the sky. Let's zoom out a bit. And I want the floor to be just under the water line there, like that. And I want him to be between, like there. And now what we're going to do is Command T for transform and take our anchor point, which you can turn on and off here in the latest version of Photoshop. In the previous version of Photoshop, it's always there. And drag that down to there. That way when we scale, it'll scale from that anchor point. And I want the head of the deer to be just below that line there. So right about there. And let's move him over just a bit more so that his head falls between the 2 legs there. That looks quite good. And we can either double click or hit on the check mark. Alright, so now we have pretty much all the elements we need, and now we're going to start making them integrate a little better. Let's go ahead and take the man, do Command J to make a copy, and call this reflection. And we'll call this man. And for the reflection, what I'm going to do is Command T for transform, move my anchor point to about the middle between where he is and where the reflection of the rock starts. So right about there, and then we're going to do flip horizontal, whoops, flip vertical, and that's going to look about right. And then what I want to do is double click on the layer over here on the right. Don't double click on the name, because then you'll change the name, but over here on the right, double click. That's going to bring up your blending options. And what we want to do is on here, underlying layer, we want to take this point here and drag it so that the foam on the water is not showing. But now you can see it's clipping, and to avoid that, we're going to hold Option and click on this and separate the two. So just like that, drag this almost all the way back. So probably around there, and there you go. So now if we hit OK, you can see that looks more realistic. And we can add a mask on this and just paint out his feet. And if I drag up and down while I'm holding Control and Option, that's going to adjust the feather of my brush. So just about there. So there you go. That looks pretty nice. Okay, and then on the man, I'm going to add a layer. We're going to call this shadow and clip it to the man. So that's hold Option and click between the 2 layers. that means this layer will be affected by the transparency of this layer. So essentially this layer is acting as an alpha mask to the layer above it. And we're going to go in gradient and just do a black gradient going up like this, and then take the opacity down on that till his shoes match about the lightness and darkness of the ground that he's standing on there. Good. Okay, now to create depth and scale, what we want to do is we want to push the deer into the background. So what I'm going to do first is lighten up the sky. So let's go on our sky layer and do Command M for curve. We're just going to bring this way up and bring the bottom of it up as well, so that the whole thing is quite a bit lighter. That's about good. And this layer I'm going to put on screen. So we're just getting the highlight there. And then our deer layer, which we'll rename deer, I'm going to go ahead and do a levels on that one. And on the levels, I want to take my black point and bring that up. So we're just pushing it into the background. About there. I want it to be darker than the sky here, but lighter over here. That looks pretty good. And then this also needs to be pushed into the background. And as things go further into the background, they're going to be less contrasty. So what we're going to do here is we're going to do Command M to add a curve. We're going to bring up the bottom of the curve and bring down the top of the curve. So you can see we're reducing the contrast there. We want it to be darker than the deer. So about there. And also on the deer, we don't want to have this as much showing there at the bottom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a mask, go in my gradient, and take the opacity of the gradient down to about 20%. And then just do a gradient up from the bottom there. Do it a couple times until I have a little more separation between these rocks in the background. I'll also do it over here on the left side. So about there, looks good. All right, next I want to add some fog. And we're going to use a custom brush for that. So let's go between the man layer and our foreground there, add a layer, and let's call this fog. I'm going to go to brushes. And in my brushes, I'm going to go to the Nuclei Photoshop Kit brushes. Let's go to brush tip. And this top one here, this one called 490, actually we can pretty much use any of these, but let's go ahead and use 491. That one looks good. And let's close that. And then in our brush settings, what I want to do is turn on shape dynamics and turn up the size jitter to about 20 and the angle jitter to 100 and the roundness jitter just a little bit, and turn on scattering, turn on both axes, and not too much scattering, but a little bit like that. And then I also want to go to transfer and turn on some opacity jitter. Now if you have a stylus, use pen pressure, but if you're not using a stylus, just go on fade or just turn it off, and what it'll do is it'll essentially randomly do some opacity jitter. So that's probably fine. You can just turn the control off and then go to about 45. Good. All right, so then on this layer, I want to make sure my foreground color is white. I want to take the opacity on the brush down to about 25%. All right, and then let's zoom in here, and I'm just going to start painting, and I can again adjust the size of my brush. I don't want it to be too big, so probably around 215 pixels. And then I'm going to paint in here. Essentially, I'm just adding fog to the scene. And by using a brush like this, you don't get that very photoshopped look of just someone airbrushing. It feels more broken up, more like actual fog. And we can also do a little bit there. All right, and then I'm also going to go onto the mask of the deer, change my brush color to black, but using the same brush, paint into the edge here, and I'm going to make my brush even smaller. Just kind of paint into the edges here, and I can even turn the opacity up a bit. But essentially what I want to, the illusion I want to create is some of the clouds are in front of the deer. So we get that really grand scale. So let's go ahead and do that there. And also along the back here, I'm going to do that. And generally we want the part of the deer that's further back, we want that to be covered by more clouds. So if you get the sense that this deer is extremely huge, well, then it would fall back into the clouds. So let's go ahead and do more here. And that looks pretty nice. All right, next we're going to just, you see how there's that edge there? I don't want that. And I also want this whole cloud or sky area to be a bit brighter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a layer under the deer and go in my gradient, change it to radial, and then just go from about here. Let's put the opacity on 100, and let's do that again. We're going to call this sunlight. And just dragging from about here, we're going to go like that. That's too bright, but we can take the opacity down. And just take the opacity down until it's mostly white, but you're still seeing that cloud edge there. Probably about there. Good. All right, now in our fog, we don't want it to be under the feet there, so I'm going to add a mask, put on my brush, change my brush back to one of the general brushes. And I can adjust that. And just paint out right under his feet there. And also probably in the shadow area here. Pretty good. And then maybe I can dynamically change the opacity of my brush by hitting one of the number keys. So if I wanted to go down to 30, just hit 3 on the keyboard. All right, next, you see this little dark edge there? I want to get rid of that. So I'm going to go onto the mask again, zoom in quite close, go back onto my brush tool, make sure it's black, make sure I'm on the mask, turn my opacity to 100, take that brush way down. So we're just getting rid of that dark halo around him. So we want him to kind of fall back into the sky, so that halo there is not helping. I kind of like that it just disappears into the sky here, so I'm not being overly concerned about where I'm painting here. Just get rid of that edge. It's quite good. All right, next I want to go to the very top and I'm going to add a gradient map. And in my gradient maps, these are the Nuclei gradient map presets. I'll include the specific gradient map I used in this, but I highly recommend you get the whole gradient preset. It's a great way to do color grading and also duotones. So I'm going to select this one here, that gradient map, and change the blending mode to soft light. And you can see right away it's giving the whole image a nice grade. All right, next I'm going to add a curve and just play with the middle of that curve a bit, pull it all down. so. And then I want to add some noise to the whole image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Layer New. I'm going to call this layer Noise or Film Grain. Change the blending mode to Overlay. And then when you change it to one of the overlay modes, you'll see this. So let's turn that on. What that's going to do is it's going to make a layer that has neutral gray. Now if I go to Filter, Noise, Add Noise, you'll see that it's giving the whole image kind of a film grain. Now you can go down to 2 if you want really fine film grain. If you want slightly more obvious film grain, pick a higher number, like anywhere up to about 10. And then what you can do is go to Filter and just add 1 blur to it. So there you go. And if you want a little more, just Command F to give it 1 more blur. And then you can take the opacity down. The nice thing about effects like this is by giving the whole image a consistent grain, you're creating the appearance that it was caught in camera. Alright, so that looks pretty nice. Now finally, what I want to do is add 1 more curves layer. This is kind of an Instagram filter trick. And that's to go to your blue layer, pick up the bottom, and that's going to make your blacks blue, and then take the top and pull it down, and that's going to make your whites a bit yellow. And you can see right away the effect that that created there. If I turn that on and off, it's giving the whole image that nice cast. Now if we turn off the guides, that looks really good. And then finally, one last thing you can always do to give your whole image a bit of a punch is create a new layer at the very top. Hold Shift, Option, Command E to compress it all into 1 layer. Call it Final Touches. And then go to your filter, Camera Raw. And go to Effects. Add a little bit of post-vignetting. Go to Detail. Add a little bit of sharpness. Helps if you're going to post it online. And you can also go to split toning and just add a little more. So you want your color to be kind of a warm yellow. Raise that up a bit. It's going to make the color a bit more striking. And then take your shadow and bring it to like a blue, between cyan and blue. And then bring that up a bit. And also, you can also do film grain here, by the way, but I prefer to do it with a layer where I can control the opacity of it. Is it okay? All right, there you have it. That's how you create that composite. And obviously you can do it with other animals, other landscapes. Pretty much the technique is what I'm trying to teach you. In the description of this video, you will find all the assets so that you can do this tutorial yourself. Also, I mentioned in the tutorial that I have a gradient map pack, which is amazing for color grading. I've also included a link for that. It's one of the cheapest products in my store, so I suggest you get that. I also have premium courses. Now, in this tutorial, I go through the steps relatively quickly, whereas in the tutorial, I take much more time to teach you the functionality of each tool, what the shortcuts are, how to use it, how to get the most out of it, and so forth. So I highly suggest you take some of those premium courses. Again, in the description, you'll find the links. Otherwise, please subscribe to my channel. I come up with a new tutorial every week. You can expect them on Monday mornings. All right, see you next time. Don't forget, subscribe to my channel, turn on notifications. You won't regret it.